Welcome to the High Vibration Reset, the podcast for women who are done with the struggle and who are ready for more energy, more flow, and more freedom. I'm Ciara Conlon, your host and guide. And with this podcast, my aim is to simplify transformation and to help you step into your full potential. Now, for those of you who don't know me or who may be listening for the first time, I'm a leadership coach and I work with organizations to help them to create high-performing teams. So my area of expertise is in team development, but in human performance overall, because the goal is to increase performance, but not to sacrifice well-being. Now, in a corporate environment, I work with both men and women. And I mentioned this because I got a text the other day from an old friend who said, I'm loving your Instagram, but what's with the new women-only direction? Now, I do work with both, but my messaging is towards women generally, because I feel I have a calling to support women in leadership. And this is something I denied for many years because I do enjoy working with both men and women. And over a number of years, I don't know, dreams, opportunities, things kept pushing me in the direction of supporting women to both get into leadership and also to manage leadership and not be afraid of raising or rising through the ranks. So it's about really removing the barriers to getting to those higher echelons, to getting to the boardroom tables, and even to getting into politics. Because we know we need more women. The world needs more women. And that is said with no disrespect towards men. But we know now that diversity improves both performance and outcomes. So my goal is really to help women to realize their own potential and to help them to avoid all of the overwhelm and the stress that comes with these higher levels of roles, but also to overcome any other of the barriers to our success, which some of these are in our heads and in our bodies. And today I've decided to do a solo episode because I want to go deeper on a number of subjects. But actually, what's happened again today is that sometimes a topic keeps coming up. And this week for me, that topic was around imposter syndrome. So a couple of times in my sessions this week, we spoke about imposter syndrome. And wherever I turn, there seems to be some reference to it. So I thought that's a sign to talk about imposter syndrome. And it is a topic that actually irritates me a little. And the reason for that is that so many people blame it for so much, blame it for too much. Any feelings of insecurity or low confidence is often blamed on, I have imposter syndrome. So I wanted to kind of clarify what exactly imposter syndrome is, why it generally occurs, and I suppose most importantly, what you can do about it if you are one of those people that is identifying as having imposter syndrome. So part of my selfish aim here is so that I don't hear so many people saying this, that I have imposter syndrome. And one of the things that I'm very clear about when I coach people is how important it is to not label yourself. So things like I'm a procrastinator or I'm a time waster or whatever you have the tendency to say about yourself. Because when we label ourselves, our subconscious mind works hard to prove that statement. So we have to be really careful about how we talk about ourselves, the words that we use. And imposter syndrome is a bit like this. But let's first look at what is it? What is imposter syndrome? Now, the concept of imposter syndrome was first introduced way back in 1978 by two psychologists. And these two ladies put their research forward. So they had done some research that focused on high achieving women. So what they saw was that despite the brilliance of these women, that there were women who didn't feel like they deserved their success. And they felt that they would at some stage be found out, that they didn't deserve what they had achieved. So the two psychologists were called Clance and Imes. And they had written a paper which they had called the imposter phenomenon in high achieving women. But over time, that name, the imposter phenomenon, evolved into what we now know as imposter syndrome. In the original paper that they wrote, they described individuals who doubted their skills, their talents, or their accomplishments, and people who had this persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud or as an imposter. Now, since then, there's been many studies done that have given this idea that up to, I think it is 80% of women at some stage in their lives have identified as suffering from imposter syndrome. 80%. It's a massive number. But when we look into what are the characteristics of imposter syndrome, we start to understand maybe that imposter syndrome is not what we think it is. So I'm going to give you a list of the characteristics that are said to be imposter syndrome. And I want you to listen and see if you recognize yourself in any of these. So the first one is self-doubt. And self-doubt is that constantly questioning your abilities and achievements, even when there is plenty of evidence telling you otherwise. The next one is lacking confidence. So not believing in yourself or what your abilities actually are. The next is not taking ownership of your success. So what I mean by that is believing or trying to prove that your success is down to luck, or it was good timing, or other people helped you. So it's not that you yourself have actually worked hard to achieve that success. Another one of the traits is fear of being found out. So this is something that's often mentioned with imposter syndrome, that there's this kind of fear, underlying nervousness that somebody's going to realize that I'm not really capable, that I'm here by accident, that I am a fraud. And that day, so there's a kind of a dread that that day will come. Or another one of those traits then is downplaying your achievements. Now, this is probably most Irish people will suffer from this one. So we don't like other people to think we're big-headed. So we constantly dismiss accomplishments as being less than they are. But when it comes to imposter syndrome, this is done in a way that the person fears that just in case they aren't as successful in the future, they downplay what's happened right now or what they've achieved right now. But what happened with this original paper is that when it was written, as I mentioned, it was called the imposter phenomenon. And then over time, somehow the name got changed to imposter syndrome. But Clance and Imes kind of stated, or were very disappointed with this happening, because the word syndrome kind of points to the idea that there's something wrong with somebody. So there's something wrong with the women who suffer from imposter syndrome, because syndrome is kind of like a medical word. But what they had meant by the phenomenon is that it was more of an experience. The imposter experience, I think, was how they referred to it. So their aim in writing the article was to normalize this experience. So their aim was to show us that we all experience these traits, these characteristics from time to time, but that they were particularly common amongst high-achieving women. They also mentioned at a later stage that it wasn't exclusive to women, that men also suffered from this phenomenon. Now, later on, sometime around 2020, I think, there was a Harvard Business Review article called "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." And this was an important point in kind of identifying and calling out the fact that it's not a syndrome, there's nothing wrong with us, and that these traits are part of being human. And in that article, there were a couple of very famous and successful women. Sheryl Sandberg was one of them. Michelle Obama was one of them. And how they and other women had confessed, and confessed is probably a strong word also, to experiencing it. So it was, this article aimed at kind of showing that this phenomenon, this syndrome, and the belief that we are suffering from it was doing more damage to women than helping them, which was the aim of the original study, was to kind of help us see the commonality. But actually, the way has been represented over the years is that there's something wrong with us. So syndrome, as I said, is a medical condition, and imposter syndrome is definitely not a medical condition that we have. But the imposter syndrome and the idea is hiding a couple of issues that we need to be clearer about. So the reasons why people think they have imposter syndrome are quite varied. And understanding these feelings, these traits, these characteristics that come up is really important, so that we can tackle what those underlying reasons are. And this is my goal in explaining this, is that when we start to see this blanket word imposter syndrome, when we, take off the hood and we look underneath, there are three kind of big ideas, three main reasons for feeling these feelings. And these are what I have experienced. I've been a coach for many years, and it's what I see coming up as the main reasons for these feelings. So one of them is around the kind of systemic bias or racial bias, that somebody might feel they don't belong in an environment. Let's say a minority female working in a male-dominated industry. She might feel like she doesn't belong. And no matter what her colleagues do to make her feel welcome, she might not feel that there's a place for her, or that her values, her ideals, her way of thinking, she might feel she's not valued in that environment. Now, that's not to say that this is a blanket thing that happens either, because I know personally, in one of my first jobs, I worked in an engineering company, and there were two other women in the company, and they were the receptionists. And I went into that company as a software tester, and a lot of my colleagues outside of the software team were engineers, or most of the company were engineers. So for me, I never felt clever enough, because I got to the stage where I understood my product. I understood kind of the environment that the product sat in, but I really didn't understand the wider ecosystem. It was electronic engineering, and I wasn't an engineer. So I was always been brought up to that idea that my understanding, my knowledge was limited. So whilst my colleagues, my male colleagues, were really helpful and encouraged me, they had nothing to do with that feeling that I had, which was that I did not have the skills for that role. Now, I could do my job. I probably didn't need to know everything, but for me, I wanted to have that broader view, probably because I'm a big picture person. And that's one of my skills or strengths, is that I can see the wider picture that we sit in, the systemic environment that a person works in. I can see all the things that affect that. So for me, in that role, not being able to understand the wider picture affected how I felt about myself and the confidence I had to do my role. So, and this is kind of the second reason, the um the next area why people suffer or think they suffer from, I'm going to call it phenomenon, imposter phenomenon, or the imposter experience. And that is not having the skills or the strengths. So, and this I see, this is a massive reason in the work environment. It's that people are promoted because they're doing a good job. They're doing their job really well, so they're promoted to manager. But they don't have management skills. They might have some basic skills, but they haven't been taught what makes a good leader. They haven't got that experience to know how to motivate a team, encourage a team, and still do their own job. So when people are first promoted, they often suffer from this self-doubt, lack of confidence, and question themselves and their abilities to do their job. So that's the second reason. The first reason, as I said, was the system or the environment not being appropriate for you, you not feeling like you belong. The second reason is lacking the skills or the strengths to do your job. So therefore, if you don't have the skills or your strengths, of course, your confidence is going to get knocked. And the third reason is a person's background. So that could be the fact that a person was bullied in their youth, that you may have had perfectionists as parents and you struggled all your life to please them. Things were never good enough. Or it could be trauma that so many people have experienced in their past. And all of these past emotions impact how we feel and how we behave at work. Because it can be difficult not to bring your old wounds with you into work. And sometimes we call this our baggage, that we carry this heavy emotional baggage right through our lives. And this baggage affects how we show up in present time. Much as we would like to think it doesn't, it does affect our present experience. So it's important to try and observe ourselves and try to understand if we are replaying old stories and making excuses for our behavior because of our past experiences. So we need to really look at, repetitive behaviors, repetitive ways of thinking that are contributing to our feelings that we are not good enough or that we're not capable of doing a role. So looking at these three areas and trying to identify where you sit. And it could be a little bit of all three. And it very often is, because we all have, a past that has contributed to how we feel about ourselves. We have all had regrets or hurt that we've experienced. We've all had times where we haven't felt good enough or we failed. So it's important to look and see where our current feelings are coming from. When we understand why we have these feelings, it's much easier to put a plan in place to start to overcome them. And regardless of where your imposter syndrome experience phenomenon comes from, there's definitely one common tactic that we can use to help us to start to control it. Because obviously, if your issue is a lack of skills and strengths, which I do see as being a big one for many people, you can easily put a training plan in place to overcome that. If it is systemic bias or the environment that doesn't suit you, that's a slightly bigger one to tackle. And it's one where you have to be honest with yourself. If this is something that you want to continue with, is it something you might be able to tackle with your team or your boss to allow you to feel more at ease or more like you belong? Or is the environment just not right, and maybe you should move to another organization or industry that suits you better? And then on the other side, when it comes down to our past experience, our emotional baggage, if we call it that, that is a longer term strategy that we need to put in place to start to work through that. And of course, with a counselor or a coach, looking at how our past affects us in the present. And again, putting a strategy in place, some techniques, some tools to allow you to stop allowing the past to impact your present. So if we look at what we can do overall to help with all of these things, it's how our thoughts can reinforce the feelings. So if you're doubting yourself, if you're lacking confidence, if you're feeling that you're not contributing enough in your team, your mindset is going to be impacting that. So managing your thoughts around it is going to be the first strategy that I would recommend to help you to start to rebuild your confidence and your ability to do your job without it being impacted by these feelings. So, for example, let's take, if something happens in a meeting And you might say that this person in the meeting always puts me down. When I speak up, this person always puts me down. So we have to start looking at how we speak to ourselves, how we react. And if I look at what I've just said there, this person always puts me down. The first thing we do with that is to challenge the always. We know that when we say words like always and never, that we can challenge this and say, well, is that really true? Because when we use these blanket words, chances are it's not always true. So we start to erode at these belief systems that we have around who we are and how we show up. So if this person, or if have said this person always puts me down, that's not going to be true, because there will be occasions where this person doesn't put me down. But more importantly, it's our perception that we need to call out here. Our perception of what's happening in the moment. And that perception is based on how I feel about myself. So if I lack confidence, I'll perceive the world through the lens of that lack of confidence. And what happens then is that I'm constantly looking for evidence to prove myself right, because that's just what we do. Our subconscious mind tries to prove that what we believe, what we think is true, regardless of how damaging that might be to ourselves. So the guy in the meeting or the girl in the meeting is always putting me down. That is my perception of what's happening. 3 people, that person might say the exact same thing to 3 people, and the 3 people will perceive it differently based on their own level of self-worth and self-confidence. So there's a challenge this week. You can start to observe yourself, start to observe what your inner voice is like. How do you speak to yourself? And how do you react with other people? So if there are people in your workplace or in your life that you feel don't respect you, put you down, dismiss you, whatever it is, I want you to really challenge that. And start to look at evidence to the contrary. So if the way you're currently thinking is making you a happy person and it's contributing to your success, well, then don't do this. There's no need to do this. But if you know that the way you're currently thinking, the way you're currently looking at yourself and your life is negatively impacting your level of happiness and your ability to be as successful as you can be, if it's damaging your potential, then we need to choose different thoughts. You need to choose a new way of looking at things. Because, as I mentioned just recently in a training that I did, a free training I recorded last week, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's a lovely quote from Wayne Dyer. So do you need to change the way you're looking at things, the way you're looking at relationships at work, the way you're looking at your abilities in work? And if you do identify with being an imposter, you definitely do need to change the way you look at things. But let that start with your thoughts. Start to call yourself out with the way that you're thinking, the way that you're thinking about situations, the way that you're thinking about yourself. And start to implant better, encouraging thoughts in your head. And one of the ways that I do this personally and that I recommend my clients do as well is with daily affirmations. And affirmations probably got a bad press a number of years ago with being these positive statements people are saying that, we're a bit airy-fairy. But there is neuroscience that proves that the way we speak to ourselves, the way we see ourselves impacts the life that we lead and what we're capable of achieving. So affirmations, positive statements about ourselves, repeated, can change our neurology. So even down to one of mine regular ones is I am strong and I am healthy. And it's really important that we reinforce what we want, because if we have any illnesses, any ailments, our thoughts will often go there in the negative. When you have an injury, your thoughts are constantly going to that injury. So we need to change our mindset around that, and saying something like, I am strong, I am healthy, I have a healthy body, helps us to change that, excuse me, that way of thinking. We know as well from neuroscience that our thoughts impact our physiology. So actually thinking a thought can change our physical environment, can create stress in the body. And of course, we know that that also leads to illness. So changing our thoughts, changing how we speak about ourselves, changing all of this with the help of affirmations is going to have a really positive impact on both our bodies and and the lives that we are living. So I hope that this has been useful for you, and that you can start to put in place some of these ideas, some of these strategies to stop saying you have imposter syndrome, and start to realize that the experience of self-doubt, low confidence, and all of these things are a normal part of being human, but also starting to challenge how often these things are true. So observe yourself this week, how you speak to yourself, how you react with other people. And what I always say to my clients, if it's not making you happy and if it's not making you more successful, choose again. So before I let you go, I also want to let you know about my Life Flow Coaching Accelerator that is starting again the beginning of October. Now, my Coaching Accelerator is a group program, but within this group program, I will be working on a one-to-one basis with each individual in the program, in the group. And we work through my Life Flow formula, the methodology that I've created, which is reset, refocus, and flow. And what we do within the program is reset your mindset for more success. So we let go of all the limiting beliefs and the unuseful ways of thinking. We also reset your emotional state. So like I described within the imposter syndrome, if there are emotions or baggage from the past that's keeping you stuck, I teach you how to release these emotions and to live more in the present and to react more in the present moment. And we also reset the nervous system. So if there's stress, overwhelm, anxiety, we can reset the nervous system so that your body is in that calmer state to be able to move forward with more clarity. The refocus piece is where we get clear on the goals and priorities and remove any of the chaos or disorganization that might be in your life. And we also install simple behaviors and habits that allow you to create more ease and flow in your life and in your work life. Now, as I mentioned, the program is starting beginning of October. There are a few places left, but time is getting very short. So you can drop me an email. If you're interested, actually, I'll put a link to book a call below, because there isn't much time to put your name down, if it sounds like something that might work for you. And also earlier in the week, as I mentioned, I recorded a live workshop, which I've made available for free. Why hard work is not enough. And it's about the 3 biggest shifts that I've made in my life that have helped me to step more fully into high vibration and flow. And these shifts kind of allowed me to have more success in my life while I was able to avoid the burnout pattern that I seem to always find myself in. So the link to that will also be below. But thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this solo episode. You can let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. And if you're not following me currently on Instagram, make sure that you come follow me. You'll find me there at Coach Ciara Conlon, because I'm in the middle of 100 days of elevating your vibe in less than 60 seconds. So daily short practical tips to help you shift your state quickly and in the moment. If you're not following the podcast, please do so. It really helps to get the message out there. So follow on the platform you're listening on. And also, please share with friends and family. So thanks again for listening in. I hope you got some benefit from today's episode, and I wish you a fabulous inner day.